District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program. Welcome to District of Conservation. I am your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. The top 3 cabinet positions for energy and conservation issues have been successfully confirmed. I want to briefly weigh in on the confirmation votes of Doug Burgum as Interior Secretary. He got the most votes of the 3. Lee Zeldin as EPA Administrator, and Chris Wright yesterday as the new Department of Energy Secretary. EPA, Interior, and Energy were under different management in the past 4 years. I would argue management that put climate posturing above each of the 3 agencies' mission statements, which is why you saw a lot of wasteful programs, you saw a detraction of mission statement, why you saw less energy production, why you saw this emphasis on preservation over conservation with respect to Department of Interior. In wake of all these confirmations, you have seen the social media behavior of commenters, ranging from apoplectic to hysterics, warning that Trump 2.0 is going to lead to the decimation of wildlife, public lands, air quality, water quality, and the like. We all lived through Trump 1.0. Did that happen? No. The same standard is going to apply under Trump 2.0. And I'm not saying this because I'm told to say that. This is my own individual thinking, someone who looks to the past, tries to assess current trends, truly is an independent thinker. There are things I disagree with the Trump administration. And if there is a attempt to sell any public lands, I will come out against it. I have yet to see any evidence of such. There's been this discussion of selling public lands to states in private interests for affordable housing. We here at the podcast have disagreed with that policy. I don't agree with 15-minute cities, freedom cities, an idea that President Trump has toyed around with. And we support the multiple use management of public lands here at the show. That's where I stand firmly. I can also hold that position and recognize that we do have to harness more energy. And I think listeners here understand that too. A lot of fear-mongering especially has come about with respect to the Alaska executive order, which will open up the last frontier to more exploration opportunities. We've seen some sportsmen and women react negatively to this executive order, thinking that some despoiling of the Tongass Forest, some despoiling of Anwar and other areas are going to be threatened and harmed. Alaska, however, is very different from what we think of in the lower 48. We have a lot of people gesturing and lecturing Alaska that they need to go with this preservationist model, no exploration, no nothing. Yet a lot of these people who are telling Alaska to stand down and to not open up new oil and gas or mining opportunities have no qualms about these activities going on abroad and importing that energy and those critical minerals here to this country. Why this disconnect? I do not understand it. If you claim to love the planet, why would you support doing it abroad, exploiting people abroad, but you're not okay with a better process that would be done and administered here in the United States on a smaller fraction of land with less despoiling of water and lands occurring? Makes no sense to me. So let's assess what we can preen from the confirmation and now first days of all these secretaries and administrators at these 3 critical agencies. Like I said, I'm encouraged. Top of mind for me is that they're moving away from this climate posturing to this notion that they're going to prioritize with respect to energy and directives. It's going to be reliable energy that's abundant, portable, and makes sense. This steering away from unreliable part-time energy like solar and wind to prioritize sources like coal, oil, natural gas, and yes, nuclear and geothermal even too. Actually reputable, reliable, clean energy sources, unlike part-time sources, solar and wind, which only work 25 and 35% of the time, if they're lucky. Coupled with all these promises of unleashing American energy, you read this through press releases, you read this through public statements of all these 3 cabinet secretaries. We haven't seen Chris Wright's statement quite yet, but he will certainly echo this whenever his social media accounts are set up. There's also this added emphasis on true conservation, that water, lands, air quality, water quality, etc., will not be despoiled in the process as more energy is unleashed. People forget, with respect to Department of Interior, that there's also the lands component. Fish and Wildlife Service, hunting and fishing is a big part of the Department of Interior. A lot of people who are commenting negatively about the confirmation of the new Interior Secretary, Doug Burgum, think that the only mission is to make public lands national parks. National parks are part of the equation. They have a place in the public land ecosystem. Are they the only public lands available? And should that be the standard? No. Only a few select areas should be determined and designated, rather, as national parks. But to essentially turn the country and all public lands into national parks is counterintuitive and contrary to the Department of Interior mission statement. What these people don't like also hearing either is that hunters and anglers are the biggest drivers of conservation funding in the U.S. The numbers show. You look at Department of Treasury findings, you look at all the funding announcements and pronouncements that come out from Fish and Wildlife Service. Hunters, anglers, and especially recreational shooters are the ones who are mostly funding these programs to restore wildlife. Sounds counterintuitive. Why would taking wildlife in small numbers through highly regulated hunts and through highly regulated fishing seasons lead to further bolstering of wildlife? It's not counterintuitive. It's what conservation is. You take your lot, no more than your lot, and you help to replenish future populations. It's very simple. Because when you don't have humans managing wildlife, in this instance, or aquatic life, nature runs its course in a very deleterious manner. And it creates an imbalance ecologically. And so we have found and we have seen that our rightful place in nature is to offer a little bit of management. But it also means that we're going to care about our surroundings because we have highly regulated hunting and fishing seasons. So people can't register in their mind that hunting and fishing is a big component. And even under the Biden-Harris administration, the social media accounts still defended hunting and fishing, amazingly enough. But the mission statement really was not emphasizing. There was a de-emphasis on true conservation efforts. So I'm excited to see that. Let's see initially what all these new secretaries and administrators have done. Lee Zeldin, EPA Administrator, one of his first actions was to go to East Palestine, Ohio, and to assess the damage done there in wake of the 2-year anniversary of that tragic train disaster that has left a lot of environmental ruin. Certain fish species are not doing well. The water quality is very questionable. A lot of chemicals still lurk in that region, and there have been a lot of health effects. What this incident reminds me of is something that happened under Trump 1.0. If you look back kind of in the context of history, damage done, funny enough, by or environmental destruction that was overseen by a supposedly environmentally friendly administration. It was Obama's second term. Trump's administration comes in, Scott Pruitt, the first EPA administrator, goes in and tries to help clean up the situation with the Gold King mine spill of 2015. His actions, Administrator Pruitt's actions, received rare praise from Denver Post, of all places, and other people who were critical of him after he left the EPA, things of that sort. So his tenure was kind of marred by some controversy. But when he was early on in his tenure at EPA as administrator, he helped to go clean up the situation, help with funding, with any sort of reimbursements, with any sort of claims, because there was over 3 million gallons of water that was tainted by this Gold King mine spill, and the Obama administration just swept it under the rug, did nothing. I'm seeing the same kind of pattern here, where the Biden administration was very careless in its response to East Palestine. They came weeks, if not months, when it was convenient for them not to help respond to locals' concerns. So you see EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin getting to work to help rectify the situation there. Again, very similar to that. So this whole narrative that Trump is going to be a despoiler of the environment can really be dispelled and repelled when you put in the Gold King mine spill, looking to the first administration, now with their response to East Palestine. Similarly, Administrator Zeldin has put out a 5-point plan called Powering the Great American Comeback Initiative. And this is a 5 pillars from the EPA, with their goal of achieving the agency's mission while energizing the greatness of the American economy. Again, not putting these two interests of environmental protection and economic development at odds with one another. The plan is outlining President Trump and Administrator Zeldin's priority, and this is kind of their first 100 days framework of what they hope to achieve. Pillar 1 states clean air, land, and water for every American. The second pillar is restore American energy dominance. The third is permitting reform, cooperative federalism, and cross-agency partnership. And you'll see this among EPA, Department of Interior, and Department of Energy, and perhaps other agencies as well, where there is some cross-pollination on energy, air, water, and land administration. Number 4, make the United States the artificial intelligence capital of the world. I never thought EPA would have this under their purview, but with the necessary need to harness more reliable, abundant energy to help meet this growing electricity demand. Electricity demand is slated to grow a lot over the next decade, and you need reliable energy sources to do that. Natural gas is being listed as a source that is going to help meet this demand. Nuclear energy, we've talked at great length about nuclear energy is going to be fitting into the equation here. And even the oft vilified coal, which globally speaking is still the most predominantly consumed energy source in the world. And we still rely on coal here in the United States. It's our third largest electricity source after natural gas and nuclear. And you can find this at the Energy Information Administration. And the fifth pillar is bringing back and protecting American auto jobs. And this is in response to the EPA tailpipe emissions rule for both light, medium, and heavy-duty cars. You can read this Great American Comeback Initiative for yourself, but I think early on, EPA Administrator Zeldin is really hitting the ground running, and we will probably see some directive or some first 100-day plan from Secretary Burgum as it relates to harnessing more energy across federal lands, and also the balance that you'll see with restoring trust, restoring balance, restoring stewardship financially and even not financially of public lands. And one of his initial statements after taking the helm of Department of Interior is saying that we begin a new journey together. The historic, purposeful, and inspiring work of Department of Interior takes on new urgency and presents new opportunities for those who seek to create a future driven by innovation versus held back by regulation. President Trump was given a mandate from the American people to achieve energy dominance. Our nation possesses an abundance of natural resources, and it's time to harness versus contain that incredible potential. Together, we'll strengthen our economy, protect our most beautiful lands, and ensure a cleaner, safer future for generations to come. We are entering an era of abundance. We are entering an era of American energy dominance. Let's get to work. Today, February 3rd, Secretary Burgum had issued his first 100 days priorities and under 6 pillars, similar to what Lee Zeldin did. I'm going to read briefly for you what these entail. These are largely off of President Trump's day one executive actions corresponding to this. You're going to see a lot of similarities between these pillars and also some of the executive action that President Trump took on a preliminary basis. The first pillar is addressing the national energy emergency. And so it will do first to identify all emergency legal authorities available to permit, lease, develop, produce, transport, refine, distribute, export, and generate domestic energy sources and critical minerals. It'll also identify all emergency and legal authorities to expedite the completion of all authorized and appropriate infrastructure, energy, environmental, and natural resource projects. Number 2, this is going off of his Unleashing American Energy Executive Order, to ensure that department's consistency with Unleashing American Energy by terminating all actions taken respecting to executive orders revoked by President Trump and reviewing all agency actions that potentially burden the development of domestic resources. It'll review all appropriations from the Inflation Reduction Act and Infrastructure Investment Act and Jobs Act, to ensure consistency with President Trump's energy dominance policies. In addition to reviewing burdensome energy development policies, the order also directs a review of all domestic mining and processing of non-fuel minerals to restore America's critical minerals dominance and take steps to prioritize updating the Geological Service list of critical minerals and accelerate the ongoing geological map. Number 3, deliver emergency price relief for American families in defeating the cost of living crisis. I didn't actually see this one. Mandates that Department of Interior take immediate steps to reduce living costs for American families. It'll initiate a department-wide review of all programs and regulations that are unnecessarily causing higher living costs for hardworking American families to identify and recommend future actions to lower costs. that could mean harmful coercive climate policies and lower the cost of energy, which in turn restores purchasing power to everyday Americans and improve the overall quality of life. So my assumption is this is what the federal freeze and reassessing some of the programs will look like. Number 4, announcing President Trump's revocation of former Outer Continental Shelf withdrawals. This relates to President Biden's last-minute executive order to block offshore oil and gas leases. You all know that offshore oil and gas leases, the royalties collected on that goes to the Land Water Conservation Fund. And if you prevent that from happening, it imperils the program's future. Number 5, achieving prosperity through deregulation. And the goal is to reduce red tape, enhance national security, improve quality of life for U.S. citizens. Interior will eliminate at least 10 existing regulations for every new one introduced and ensure that the cost of new regulations are offset by removing the cost of previous ones. And the final pillar, number 6, pertaining to unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential. So it'll look to open up a very small select portion of ANWR. It'll also look to safely explore mineral sites that can be safely harnessed and offshore oil and gas, and other verticals like that. So there is a first 100 days roadmap from Burgum. Burgum, if you were not aware, is not going to despoil public lands. And I have that on good authority. And it's just common sense from what you can deduce from his past actions as governor. So he was in charge of launching an outdoors council, which is more so catered to hikers, bikers, campers. Not so much people in the hook and billet crowd, but the hook and billet crowd supports these outdoor councils too. He's a hunter. He has done a lot also to help with, and I think encourage, the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library that's going to be opening in the Badlands region next year around America's 250th birthday. And while he's really big and bold about energy development, he recognizes that energy development's not the only pillar or priority of Department of Interior. What a lot of people, again, lose and not acknowledge and understand about DOI is there's also a stewarding of lands component. He wants to ensure that national monuments remain open to multiple uses. He wants to ensure that BLM and other Fish and Wildlife Service lands are open to recreationists and not closed off. He indicated in his confirmation hearing that he would like to see some reforms to the Antiquities Act. That's a very reasonable position to hold because presidential power is very questionable under that law as it's interpreted right now, where presidents do these blanket monument designations to tee up national monuments to become national parks. And if you like the integrity of national parks, you should not be okay with this because everything can be a national park under these standards. And not everything is a national park. We want to have public lands open to multiple uses. And when you put these carte blanche monument designations, it opens the door to more wilderness designations, which are the most strict of any public land designation category there is. There is a place for wilderness. Should everything be wilderness? No, because that defeats the purpose of what public lands are. Public lands are to be open to the public. I firmly stand by this position. I'm from the West. I'm a Westerner. I want to see the integrity of public lands maintained. Public lands, however, have been routinely abused, especially under Democratic administrations, to keep the public off of public lands. We've stated and listed many such incidences of this occurring under Democratic administrations. If there's some straying away from this multiple use philosophy or recreationist approach under this administration, as I've tried to communicate under the last Trump administration, I will firmly come out against any such wholesale transfer of land. We're not going to see that happen because the dynamics are not there. You see even division among Republicans where these proposals are being flirted with reconciliation. You saw former Interior Secretary Zinke and others say, I will not support any wholesale transfer of public lands through reconciliation, through standalone bills. With the slim majorities Republicans have in Congress, you will not see such an effort pass. They may deliberate, they may propose some stuff. It's not going to pass. Therefore, public lands and their integrity are going to stay. However, what will change will be a better administration of public lands to return it back to its multiple use intent and philosophy that has underpinned public lands management in the United States. The Biden-Harris administration was pivoting to this rewilding, no-touch philosophy and mission, and that was unacceptable. Overdevelopment, while I don't think it's going to be a reality, is also another problem, albeit a smaller one. But I will call out any such efforts. You can count on me and plenty of other conservative conservationists to do so. But I think Secretary Burgum understands what balance is. Look at his record in North Dakota. I don't think he's going to administer the wholesale transfer of public lands. He's built a lot of trust. Of the three nominees for these energy and conservation positions, he received the most bipartisan support. He got almost 80 votes, including a lot of Democrats. They trust him. It's not because we need to get the approval of preservationist Democrats, but he has a lot of bipartisan credibility, so to speak. He's also working at the pleasure of President Trump, and they've built a relationship. If you've noticed, when Burgum ran for president, Trump wasn't really attacking him so much. Now, of course, that he's tapped him as Interior Secretary, he's going to administer that. And something else to also remember, and we're going to hark on this again, sometimes you have to repeat to get people to understand things. Repetition sometimes invites people to be curious about things, but President Trump signed into law the Great American Outdoors Act, the most seminal conservation bill in half a century when it was signed into law in 2020, summer of 2020. That states that there will be permanent funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is primarily funded by offshore oil and gas royalties. And it also said that there will be ways to address the Park Service, National Park Service, maintenance backlog, which President Biden grew by $9 billion, contra to what the law stated it was supposed to do to help address the backlog issue. You will see that maintenance backlog hopefully addressed. We are seeing some, and I'll talk about this in an episode tomorrow, about resistance from supposed National Park Service employees who are saying that cuts to extraneous miscellaneous DEI programs is somehow going to cut at the integrity of NPS, which is baloney. Those programs do nothing to bolster public lands. It's just wasteful spending. So I think the integrity of even the NPS, which is one of the most popular government agencies, believe it or not, is going to be restored. We're going to see more roads repaired, more infrastructure repaired, and hopefully this decrease in maintenance backlog that we saw balloon under President Biden. And with Secretary Wright, I'm really excited to see, and we've talked about this before here on the show with our guests and myself when I've done these monologue episodes, is he is perhaps the first person who's worked in the energy industry to helm DOE. We're going to see him work in concert with Doug Burgum in this National Energy Council, which we were told would be created and administered. So they're going to be partners in helping to unleash American energy in a safe and responsible way. But what I think people forget about Department of Energy is they also handle several other things. You're not going to see these crazy energy efficiency standards, which will ban household appliances. You're also going to see, hopefully, a harnessing of more nuclear energy, because nuclear falls under Department of Energy. That's a little different from DOI, but nuclear energy is certainly going to be supercharged more because of Secretary Wright's experience in that industry. So that's something you have to look forward to. I think we could all look forward to as he starts to get into the stream of things in his job. And we will report periodically about what initiatives there might be responding to the first 100 days, like what we've seen with EPA, Interior, and similarly with energy. But that's what you have to know about all of these three gentlemen being confirmed, some of their early actions, and why we will not see a corresponding despoiling of the environment. If you enjoyed this installment of District of Conservation, I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.